Welcome back, students, and now it is time for video lesson number 14, or our lesson on how to find the distance between points on the coordinate plane. For this lesson, you will need your TOC you were given in class, TOC number 14. You will need a pen or pencil to be able to complete the notes, and highlighters, markers, or colored pencils because we will be adding lots of points and you want to use different colors. And then calculators are permitted. You probably don't need them, but they are allowed. Let's dive in. On the front of your notes at the very top, we have a little bit of instructions. It says to find the distance between 2 points, plot or graph those points on the coordinate grid. Then count the distance or units between them. Now, here's the kicker. Don't start counting until you move off the first point. Students want to count that first point as number 1, but that will give you a wrong calculation because you have to move off that first point before you have a space that is between two distances. So let's do an example. What is the distance between 0, -2, and 4, -2? So I've already plotted the points for you. If you look, 4, -2 is in the 4th quadrant, and 0, -2 is on the y-axis. And if I count those spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, there are 4 units between them. Now, sometimes they will ask you to find the distance, but not give you a coordinate grid. So if you're not given a coordinate grid, you want to use the absolute value of those numbers to determine the distance from the axis, and then you either add or subtract the distances depending on where you are in relationship to the axes. So if you're on opposite sides of the axis, you're going to add those distances. If you're on the same side of the axis, you're going to subtract them. For example, we are given these 2 points, 0, -2, and 4, -2. We can disregard the -2's because those are the same points, so we're just going to cross those out. We just have to look at the 0 and the 4. So the absolute value of 0 is 0, and the absolute value of 4 is 4. And then I just simply add those absolute values together to come up with the distance between them, which is 4. And we found that by counting as well. You can also draw your own coordinate grid, but that will take a lot of time. So here's our examples that are at the bottom of the page. We have 1, 4, and -3, 4. I'm going to go ahead and plot them on the graph. 1, 4 is in quadrant 1, -3, 4 is in quadrant 2, and then I'm going to count the distance between them. 1, 2, 3, 4. You do not have to draw these little swoopy things. That is for me to show you as we count between the distances, but it is helpful to go ahead and plot these points on the coordinate plane. So we counted that there were 4. Now, let me show you how to do it without the coordinate plane. Write down your coordinates, disregard the coordinate that is the same, which is our 4's. Then we're going to find the absolute value of the other ones remaining, which is 1 and -3. The absolute value of 1 is 1. The absolute value of -3 is 3. So 1 and 3, since they're on opposite sides of the axes, then I'm going to add them together, and that gives me 4 units as well. So you can find the distance either with the coordinate plane or without. Here's another example. -8, 8, and -8, 2. Or sorry, -2. That's in quadrant 2, and then the last one's in quadrant 3. And if I count those spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's 10 units apart. Here's how you would find it without the coordinate plane. List your coordinates, cross out the ones that match. You're left with 8 and -2. Find the absolute value, and then since they're on opposite sides of the axis, you add them together, which is also 10. Here's our next one. -2, -5 is in the 3rd quadrant. Remember, you go over and then down. And then -2, 1 is in our 2nd quadrant. I'm going to go ahead and count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It is 6 units apart. And if I lined them up, I can disregard the negative 2's. Negative 5, the absolute value is 5. 1, the absolute value is 1. If I add them together, because they're on opposite sides of the x-axis, then I get 6 units as well. All right, we're on question number 4, and this one's a little bit different. If you look at this, this is on the y-axis. We're going to go over 0 and then up 9, and then over 0 and then up 4. And if I count those, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units apart. And if I look at it mathematically, without a coordinate grid, I would disregard the zeros because those are the same, and then 9 and 4. Now, the absolute value, since they're both positive, I have the same value, they're both positive, so they're on the same side of the x-axis, which means they're not across an axis. So instead of adding them, because if I added them I get 13, and those you can easily see are not 13 units apart, since they're on the same side of the axis, I actually end up subtracting them. 9 minus 4 is 5. Remember, subtract the spaces when they're on the same side of the axis. And when I say spaces, I mean the absolute values. So subtract the absolute values when they're on the same side of the axis, or if they have the same value, meaning they're both positive or they're both negative. Here's another one where instead of being on the y-axis, these are both on the x-axis this time. So this one goes over negative 5 and then up 0. And the second one is over negative 8, but up or down 0. So they're both on the x-axis this time, but since they're on the x-axis, they're not across the y-axis. So if I count 1, 2, 3, they are 3 units apart. And if I look at it, if I didn't have a coordinate grid, line them up, I would disregard the zeros because those are the same, and then find the absolute value of both. So negative 5, the absolute value is 5. The absolute value of negative 8 is 8. And since they are on the same side and they're both negative, then when I started, they're both negative. So then I would subtract them. 8 minus 5 also gives me 3. If I added them, I would get 13. And these are not 13 units across or 13 units apart. So be careful. If they have the same sign when you start, like they're both positive or they're both negative, then you're going to subtract them. So subtract the absolute values when they are on the same side of the axis. And while we're here, here's your little nugget. I want you to draw a smiley face in the bottom left corner of your paper. Again, draw a smiley face in the bottom left corner of your paper. The next one, we have negative 3, 4, which is in the second quadrant, and 3, 4. And this does go over the top of another point, I realize that. So use a different color just to help clarify. And if I count them, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units. Mathematically, if we look at it, we would cross out the 4's and then look at the absolute value. There are 3 units to the y-axis and then another 3 units on the other side of the y-axis, so that would give me a total of 6 units. And then we have 2 more to go. This one, negative 4, negative 9, is in the third quadrant, and 3, negative 9 is in the fourth quadrant. And if I count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they are 7 units apart. Look at it mathematically. I would cross out the negative 9, and then I would find the absolute value of negative 4, which is 4, absolute value of 3, which is 3. They are on opposite sides of the y-axis, so I would add them, and I would get 7 units. Last one, we're going to do negative 2, 7, and then negative 8, 7, and then I would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 6 units apart. And if I look at these, I cross out the 7. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2. Absolute value of negative 8 is 8. But this one I'm going to subtract because they're on the same side and in the same quadrant. So I would just subtract 8 minus 2 and get 6. Don't forget, subtract the spaces when they're on the same side of the axis or in the same quadrant. All right, now it's time to show what you know. Log in and take that homework quiz.